Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of SuperFantaFi. This being a show where I talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and/or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the live-action Avatar: The Last Airbender, Season 1, Episode 5. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, we open to our heroes running away from Fire Nation soldiers because it's now widespread. Well, no, because it seems like the only reason why they, well, because later on Zuko, finds out, like, words out about the Avatar, but I don't know if those Fire Nation soldiers were specifically after him for that, because they were saying, like, oh yeah, Sokka was getting close to a girl, but it turned out she was a Fire Nation soldier. So I'm like, I wonder if that in reference to, like, maybe that's a storyline they didn't adapt for the show, but they kind of winked and nod towards. Once again, there's a lot of, like, episodical things that are just character driven, that are just like wacky shenanigans on this adventure that the live action is not going to adapt. So I'm curious, is that in reference to a story, or is that kind of just like a random thing they made up of, like, oh yeah, like just Sokka being kind of like his relationship with pretty girls, essentially, of just like, oh, like jumping at any opportunity, not kind of, well, it's like, it's not really my fault, but we didn't see how she was decked out, whether it was clear or not she was a Fire Nation. Maybe it could just mean that she was a regular citizen and didn't reported him, and didn't necessarily have to be a soldier. But either way, what I thought was interesting too is the beginning of this episode, and it ends up being this through line throughout the episode, is kind of this element of, they slowly have been seeping in certain aspects about Aang's philosophy and just his perspective on things. I mean, we've already gotten his perspective on things, but leaning into, like, right, the air nomads, the airbenders were Tibetan monks, and a lot of those philosophies, we getting a little peek into those through Aang. Like, for example, last episode was the first episode they mentioned the fact is Aang's a vegetarian. Makes sense. But in this episode, like, he's all, like, not, I think it's his perspective as an airbender, but also his perspective as the Avatar. It isn't just about protecting the world of man, it's also about protecting nature. So when they come across a forest that was burned, like, he feels bad, because it's like, right, like, out of anyone, like, not just as the Avatar, but on a stacked layer on top of that of being an airbender, he's going to be a lot more in tune with nature than other people. I mean, I guess you could argue that's like the Appa and Momo of it all as well, too. That's kind of in correlation with his relationship with nature, too. It's just, like I said, a lot of those beliefs, I think it's little things like that I think is so interesting, because his perspective and his philosophy as an airbender is such a fundamental aspect of his morals, and it creates quite the conundrum later on in this series. And that's always a conundrum. That conundrum is always where I'm like, oh yeah, like that toe that line of, like, your beliefs as a hero, and what beliefs are you willing to compromise on, and that ends up being a conversation, for Aang later on in the story. But I think it's just interesting weaving certain, like, philosophies and beliefs, obviously angles, not only, like I said, from being an Avatar, but also from just being an airbender. Those philosophies kind of getting, like, sewn in, like, at this point in the story too, just like little things like that. Because the fact of the matter is, it's obviously some people probably wouldn't be as, like, some people, like, would look at it as like, oh, it's a shame Aang's taking it such to heart, because once again, it's like, I'm supposed to protect the natural world too, but it's also just a representation of the Fire Nation. Especially later on, they're like, oh yeah, the Fire Nation didn't burn that by accident. They burnt it intentionally just to make it so they'd be easy. That's all it was. It just was meant to make traversal easier. That's why they burned a large chunk of this forest, just for that purpose alone. Kind of goes back to that point that Ira was making, like, what, in the first episode, about the Fire Nation, basically them being kind of like a fire that's all consuming. So, but they end up in a village, and they learn about people who were taken and vanished without a trace. And this is our introduction to the spirit world, which is something we haven't obviously tackled at all. This is our first inkling of the flip side to this world, and Aang wants to go there and try and retrieve these missing people, and in the process, he doesn't end up going alone. He ends up dragging Katara and Sokka, which I'm like, because the whole element of this, I'm like, I don't remember if I remember this storyline specifically, but I do remember vaguely Aang going to the spirit world. I'd actually completely forgotten about Ko until he popped up. I was like, oh right, how could I forget this nightmare fuel inducing thing? Voiced by George Takei too, or Takai. I always go back and forth on the pronunciation. That creepy thing, especially when it's just like, yeah, the Ko the face stealer. It's like, yeah, completely and utterly forgot about that thing. That thing is a creepy SOB. But, and obviously, once again, that's actually interesting. Like, the only supernatural element is like, oh yeah, the superpowers, but like the real supernatural elements of this world, like this is our first time like fully diving into them with the spirit world. Hey, here's a giant spiritual owl talking to you, but only Aang can understand it because he's the Avatar. To everyone else, it sounds like hooting. Then Sokka runs into a fox. I wonder, does foxes have the same association in like Buddhism like they do in Japanese, like, I don't know if it even be Japanese folklore or, well, because Buddha, because like, or am I thinking, because I'd assume Shinto Buddhism would be like a, I don't know if that's even a Shinto Buddhism thing, or is it just like a Japanese, like, you know how like foxes are kind of seen to represent, I mean, I always attribute it to being a Japanese thing, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's just like a general thing of, you know, because it's like sly like a fox. Like foxes are like tricksters, you know, specifically in Japanese mythology, but they're always known it because it's being known as sly like a fox. So but maybe that does originate maybe that originates in Japanese, but they've always been attributed as tricksters. That was interesting too, because like the one they ran into wasn't like a nine-tail, so that maybe like the nine-tails of it all is maybe like a specific like Japanese version, like Kurama from Naruto. But I think the one Sokka ran into was like three tails. But I was like, I just think that's interesting. I'm also curious. I'm like, is that tied into what I think it ties into this season? Because I was like, I think so. That's why I'm feeling stupid too, because I'm like, does that tie in to like where this season goes? I think it does, because it's such a specific thing, and I know Sokka's connection to the Northern Tribe storyline. So I'm like, was that set up for that? Was that an introduction there? Because I'm like, does that correlate? Because is that who I think it is? I feel so stupid because I don't remember, but I'm like, because I think I know who's playing that person. And now in retrospect, I'm like, that sounded like that was her voice. So that could have been like set up for that. I like I said, I'm speaking in circles because I'm like, I don't know. I don't know if this ties into a certain character. But in the fact is that Fox specifically, no one else, like Katara didn't solo run into another creature. It was only Sokka who ran into this particular creature. He ran into a fox specifically, and she was giving him warnings and stuff. So I'm like, it probably ties into what I think it ties into. But either way, I know I spent that time like walking, like dancing around the subject, but I'm just trying to figure out if that's what I think it is. But either way, ignore me and my stupid like cryptic speculation. Sorry. Once again, that's the problem of vaguely remembering things, and it'd probably be better off if I probably didn't even know Avatar at all, because it's just like trying to remember from a show I haven't seen in over 15, 16 years, so whatever the case may be. When it's all said and done, our heroes ended up getting separated because the spirit of this place, which we never found out how it came to be, the spirit of that area is wounded. I thought that was interesting because like the statue of it is represented by a bear, and it's got like 3 claw marks, but the spirit itself also had the claw marks too. So I don't know if but it's like that's why the spirit's running wild, and it's not normally violent or anything, but it's like that because it's injured, and we never really got into how that happened. But obviously this place is about, as the owl had warned, it's all about truce, and truce can be a very hard thing for humans to face. the ugly side of things. And in Katara's case, it's about her mom. She blames herself because also her mom isn't a waterbender. I was wondering if her mom was a water, but it turns out she's not. But either way, Katara ended up feeling like she's to blame for her mom's death because her mom died protecting her. It's like, I told them in order to protect her daughter and make them believe that the only waterbender left in the southern tribe is dead, is she sacrificed herself. And especially because Katara couldn't control her power enough to save her mom in that instance. And it's like, if I had taken him down, maybe my mom would still be alive. Like, that guilt and regret is what drives her, I think, like, a lot of that trauma, like, her mom's death, I think that's an angle that's there subconsciously that she, like, buried, but now it's kind of being brought to the forefront. Then there's the whole situation with Sokka, where it's just like, right, like, did I only skate by because of other people? Like, oh, I passed this test I'm supposed to pass, but the only reason I did is because of someone else, and, am I not good enough? Especially in his father's eyes. It's his motivation of why he tries so hard. He wants to prove himself as a warrior because he feels like even in his father's eyes, he's not good enough. And it's just like, he feels he has so much to prove to so many other people, his father in particular, and it's like, I'm a disappointment in his eyes. And it's like, that's why when he was given that responsibility, he's like, I'm gonna do it, I'm gonna see this through. And because even the fox called him out, it's like, oh, like, do you do that a lot, like, deflect with humor, which he does. It is Sokka's way to, once again, it is his role as the comic relief, but it is to overcompensate for a lot of his own insecurities that but have always been bubbling there beneath the surface. But now, much like Katara, we're seeing it kind of finally float to the surface. Both feeling it's not even beautiful. It's just like tragic parallel between both of them, which they just feel like they failed in some regard, and they failed their parents in regard. Katara feeling like she failed their mom. Sokka feels like he's failing their dad. And both are. Sokka's pushing forward as a warrior and, trying to be what his father needs him to be and wants him to be. And also Katara is trying to learn waterbending because I'm sure it's triggered by, it's also like the feeling of, if I could have controlled my bending back then, maybe I could have saved mom's life. And the fact is that I won't make that mistake again. I won't let my inability stop me from saving someone that I care about. I mean, obviously, Aang's in the same boat where it's like he was driven by his guilt of what happened to the air temple. Obviously, like, the place tried to get to him, but he shrugged it off because he's the Avatar. So, once again, he's a little more in tuned with kind of the illusions of this place, but ends up running into Ko, which obviously Ko and the Avatar have had run-ins in the past, obviously. Not just Aang specifically, but prior avatars. It's like, yeah, one of you actually tried to kill me because apparently I stole the face of someone you love and shifted to that face. I was like, yeah, that scene in particular, I was like, yeah, that seemed extra familiar. It's like, that's super jacked up. But ultimately, Aang ends up finding Gyatso there in the spirit world, whereas everyone else from the air temple decided to kind of join the great cycle. I forgot what they called it. I mean, obviously it's like the circle of life and stuff, but it's like, yeah, because they are monks, they do believe in reincarnation. So it's like, let's kind of join kind of like the big cycle, but he decided not to kind of, no, it wasn't even, because it's like, it's not even about reincarnation. It's like, it was about the great enlightenment. It's like, he didn't go to enlightenment. Everyone else did, but he felt like I had to stay behind. It's like, Aang will be here at some point in time and I need to wait. So he chose to wait for his friend, and he gave Aang this piece of knowledge of saying, like, I would like to alleviate his guilt, because it's like, I know you're going to beat yourself up about it, my friend. Like, you couldn't have done anything. If you had stayed, you would have died with us too. And that's the thing of, even Gyatso saying that, it means the world to Aang, but it doesn't change the fact, does Aang actually believe that? It's about that pain. It's like letting it go. And all of them have this pain and this trauma and this feeling of doubt and fear that they're all riddled with. And it's like, has Aang let it go because of what Gyatso said? We'll ultimately have to wait to see. But he needs to not only rescue Sokka and Katara, but he also needs to rescue the villagers that were taken. But the problem is, obviously here you can't bend, and so it's like, how do you fight something like that here? So that goes back to the conversation of, well, Code claimed I stole something from him, one of the previous avatars, and that being Roku. So it's like, right, who was the previous fire avatar, or maybe he was a previous one. Is he like he's the main dude, isn't he? Because he's a dude. Because that's why I'm like trying to remember. I was like, was Roku his name? That's why I'm so confused. I was like, I thought his name was something else, but maybe it wasn't. It's just been so long. But I think he was the most recent fire one. Timeline wise, it would make sense in correlation to like the story in the past of the Avatar and the Fire Nation and stuff. But either way, to get in contact with Roku, just like he did Kyoshi, he has to go to a shrine to kind of fully... Because they did set that up, which I'm like, I don't remember if that was necessarily 100% the rule in the original series. Maybe it was, and I just don't remember. Because I know... Because I was about to say, like, yeah, I think that might be a rule they're coming up with for the show. I mean, it could also be a thing of... Because he's still so early into being the Avatar, he can't do that all willy-nilly now, but eventually he can. Because I'm like, trying to remember, I'm like, he's contacted the other Avatars before without being at their shrines, hasn't he? Does he have to be at the shrines? Because I'm thinking of specific conversations he has later on. You'd have to go to specific shrines dedicated to him, but I'm like, to talk to certain people late in the series, he didn't go to specific shrines. Maybe, I'm sure there's like that. It's probably more of the spirit world thing where certain areas, the lane between the living realm and the spirit realm are thinner. Those places might make it easier for him to contact or get in contact with the previous avatars, but like him going to having to go to shrines, I don't remember that. That's when I'm like, is that something made up specifically? Because they did have that line of dialogue. The only reason why he was able to talk to Kyoshi is because he was at her shrines, but it's like, I don't remember that dialogue, but like from the original series, but maybe it was there and it's been so long. Like I said, maybe it is just utilizing that thin lane between the spirit world and the human world, like the living world. Maybe that's how he utilizes that later on without having shrines, or maybe it's just, like I said, I don't know. The way Gyatso was kind of looking at Aang when Aang was like, all right, I'm going to go quickly talk to Roku so that I could figure out how to save everyone. But in that moment, like, Gyatso was on... Because he was like, right, can we save this for when I come back so we can talk after all this? And Gyatso was like, of course. It's like, he knows, like, I guess I won't be here necessarily. There's no guarantee I'll still be here. Like, my only purpose was to kind of help you. Because I can't help you on what kind of avatar... On your road to be the avatar, I can't help you. I just want to... Because for Aang, it is this situation of he's so lost. It's like, what can I do? Like, I see so many problems in the world, but I don't know how to go about, even begin tackling any of this. Because Katara was telling him it's not on him to save everyone. It's like to handle everything. But for him, it's like, it is. Like I have this responsibility as the Avatar. Like Boomy said last episode, I have to do the impossible. That's the Avatar's job. And it's getting to him because it's like, right, I'm not firing on all cylinders. Am I able to help everyone? And when we do get to the northern tribe, like, what can I do to help? What is this tragedy? How can I prevent it? Will I be able to prevent it? That whole conversation about pain and regret and kind of like staying in your pain is so riddled throughout the other aspects of the episode, which I think is interesting. Because obviously, like, you have the let's start off with the Zuko stuff. Zuko is jumping down like Lieutenant G's like throat. Is his lieutenant commander? I think it's lieutenant. He's jumping down G's throat because it's like he's lashing out because it's like, wait, you haven't heard anything about the Avatar? Oh, but you ignoring these rumors about some ice in areas that's not supposed to be ice. It's like one of the people we're going after is a waterbender, and obviously like Katara has gotten better at freezing ice because she's utilized what she's learned from the earthbenders, which I think is kind of probably the reason why they set that up too, of like she was starting to feel more confident as a waterbender, and then now this episode happens where it's just kind of like that fear and doubt, like I said, that was always there is now finally bubbling to the surface. Either way, Zuko says like, you calls him an idiot and says like, fine, I'll handle it myself. It's like, yeah, you're the way you're treating your man is just kind of the same way your father treats you. It's just that cycle of you're like kind of the abusive, like you kind of pass it down. It's kind of similar in that regard. It's like, in fact, it's super apparent because you see Azula kind of doing the exact same thing of what their father puts them through. They kind of ripple that down and kind of like dish it out to other people, because they can't really do anything to their father, but it can do it to other people. Anyway, we'll get to Azula in a second, but I love they went asking for information, and I love Zuko paying the guy, being like, all right, so had there been any waterbenders? He's like, nope. But the Avatar was here, and word is that he was with some waterbenders, and it's like, oh, isn't that right? It's like, no. Some pirate said that, and then they bring up all the stuff last episode of like, oh yeah, he went up against the Mad King of Omashu, and I just love Iroh leaning in. Zuko, I think they know about the Avatar, and then just Zuko looking at him like, yes, Uncle. I think that's a safe assumption. They end up running into June, who's played by Arden Cho, which I was like, oh, that's so cool. I was so excited when I saw her in the cast. When I saw the name June, I was like, that name did not register to me. When she pops up, I'm like, I think I remember June. I don't think I'm pretty sure that's a character from the show. Because, like, especially the creature she's on seems so familiar, but, like, the bounty hunter and angle and everything, I'm like, I feel like I remember that. Like, isn't she someone that just like Zuko, don't the squad run into her like multiple times throughout the series? I don't remember. Because Iroh comes at this from, he's like, oh, like I watched a Pi Show game, and he was kind of making this reference of, you get telling Zuko, hey, you get so caught up in right and wrong, there is no right and wrong in the grand scheme of things. And the fact is that Zhao is so far ahead of us because he's willing to kind of go about things a certain way. Zuko's so stuck in the realm of this is what we got to do the more honorable way, working with a mercenary, which is, it's like, how can you trust someone who has no loyalty? Their only loyalty is to who's paying them. But it's like, yeah, but like she's dedicated, because if she doesn't do the job, she doesn't get paid, nor does she get to eat. So she's motivated enough. So I even love the whole thing of her being like, okay, I'll let this pass. You besmirching my name only because your dad's kind of cute. Which I was like, oh, Iroh was almost like, hey, this old man still got it. He didn't quite go about it that way, but he kind of almost like raised the eyebrows like, oh, okay. But kind of paralleling no, let me stay with Zuko for a second, because we got that ending in the conversation about pain, how Zuko is so alone, and all he has is that pain, and it's like, when that's your companion, when that's your partner and everything, he feels so even more isolated. All of his men are gathered around joking with Lieutenant G, but it's like, he just kind of feels that alone, and it kind of makes him lash out at people too. It's like your approach to things kind of has made you unapproachable in a lot of ways. Like, your men aren't going to want to hang out with you, but it just isolates you even more, where it just feels like the only person you really have on your side in this boat, like, they follow you, but the only person that's by your side wholeheartedly is Iroh. But other than that, like, switching over to the Azula side, once again, squirming and machinations, and you love it, where she's like, oh, Zhao seems pretty capable. And it's like, oh, Father, the way you command your people, and, oh, like, just what qualities they have and stuff. It's like, oh, but imagine what Zhao, someone of his capabilities, could truly be capable of if you nudged them and gave them some support. And Ozai's like, you're right. And she's like, good. And she's walking away. He was like, yeah, but it wasn't Zhao that found the Avatar. It was your brother. And you could see it like, oh, her dad stuck that knife in it, and he made sure to twist it. He was like, next time, like, those are the qualities of a leader. Like, instead of being like saying, like, trying to sway me with your coy words. Like, your brother's out there doing stuff. He's actually, not just speaking. He's actually making moves. He's actions speak louder than words type of situation. And you see that look on his face when she walks away. He smiles because he's like, that's the manipulative shit right there. It's like, oh, let me motivate you more, push you, and that's why Zula's looking for perfection. She's beating up one of the trainers, and they're like, well, you didn't have to go that hard. And she's like, I have to. It's not my fault that they're weak. They're like, you're already the best, but she's like, and just that sad look in her eyes. She had it when she was walking away from her dad, and in this moment too, of just, it's not good enough. I'm not good enough. And once again, just plays and shows you what their fathers, like their attempts to get their father's love, what it makes. I think that's probably also why they introduced Azula early on in this way, because I'm like, you never got these sympathetic moments with Azula as like when you first introduced to her, to my recollection. Once again, like the original series really leaned into how much of a sociopath Azula is, and you have moments of sympathy and empathy, but I think they're trying to make you a little more empathetic to her from the beginning. And I think it's supposed to be that duality of like, man, it ain't just one child that's screwed up, it's both of his children, kind of showcasing it's not the greatest father in the world. But it's just like, I was like, this kind of makes you kind of feel bad for Azula, because she seems like such a spoiled brat. She gives off that energy, a sociopathic spoiled brat. But it's like, once again, they feel they have so much to prove. Especially in her case, it's like, no matter what I do, I will always be second fiddle to Zuko. He was banished, and yet he's still in a better position in our father's eyes than I am. And I think that, once again, her father Ozai wants to use that as motivation. He saw, like, yeah, let that motivate you. Yeah, this will push you even further. Like, he recognizes, like, he's the tug and pull of, like, my children wanting my love and affection. Let's see which one of you will come out on top and prove yourself truly worthy to be an heir, So, and we even see at the end of the episode, once again, that conversation of pain where, and the inability to let it go, that it kind of becomes this lingering thing you can't escape, that loneliness and solitude for Zuko, and in Azula's case, her need to like practice into the night, like her friends are asleep and they're worn out because she's just continuously training, because it's like, I have to be perfect, I have to be great. It did seem at one point in time like her flame. That's why at first I was like, no, that's not tied to that other thing, is it? It's like, well, doesn't she have blue flames? I'd actually forgotten about it, because at first when I saw the blue, I was like, is that tied into the lightning thing? And I was like, had she started that this early? Does she even know how to do that at this point in time? Because, like, didn't she know how to do that? I'm curious, like, when they introduced that in the story, the whole lightning thing. And I was wondering if that's like, but I feel like I vaguely do remember her having blue flames. I don't know if I'm like just being extra stupid or what. Cause wasn't the blue flames like a very unique thing to her? I think it's like, doesn't like no one else in the series. I mean, I don't know about Korra, because I haven't seen enough of Korra to know that. But I'm like, didn't she have uniquely blue flames? I actually, because you see it for a moment during training, like her flames went from like red to blue. That's why I was like I said, I thought it was a lightning thing coming up, but it's like, it's not. And I think she just naturally had blue flames. I mean, I guess it's like, I mean, obviously, like, I guess if you heat up fire enough, like, I guess that just showcases like she's able to push her flames so powerfully that they go from like a orange, reddish orange to like pure blue. I'm sure maybe there's also something with like, her name's Azula, it's close to Azure. Maybe there's layers to that I've never correlated. Once again, I've not seen the show in over like 15 or 16 years, so do forgive me, like, if some stuff was super apparent then that like I never correlated because I was a stupid teenager. Either way, I'm once again going off on my own diatribes again. I'm sorry, but some interesting developments. I'm curious to see where all this ends up taking us. Obviously, we're going to kind of conclude this next episode. It's going to be interesting to see Aang's conversation with Roku and what that pertains, especially because he's in the heart of the Fire Nation. Because they were already in borderline Fire Nation territory. At least, like, it's like an area where it's kind of you're crossing like Fire Nation boundaries, regardless. But like you're in, I guess, full like Fire Nation territory where he's going to get towards Roku's shrine. So it's gonna be interesting to see how this all plays out next episode. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.